In 1805, the Austrian army marched east under gray skies and fading certainty. At its head stood Francis II, ruler of an empire so ancient it seemed immune to time itself. For nearly 1,000 years, the Holy Roman Empire had endured through plagues, reforms, religious wars, and dynastic feuds. It was less a country than a civilization stitched together by tradition. But on the fields of Austerlitz, tradition met something new: speed, discipline, and the ruthless ambition of Napoleon Bonaparte. And Europe would never look the same again. The defeat was catastrophic. Napoleon's forces shattered the Austrian and Russian armies with calculated precision. Cannons roared across Moravia, and centuries of imperial prestige dissolved in smoke. Francis II returned not as a victorious guardian of Christendom, but as a ruler confronting an unbearable truth: the medieval structure he commanded could no longer survive in the age of nationalism and modern warfare. By 1806, the unthinkable happened. The Holy Roman Empire, an institution dating back to Charlemagne, ceased to exist. Francis renounced his imperial crown. There was no grand ceremony marking its transformation. No symbolic rebirth. It simply vanished. In its place, Napoleon constructed the Confederation of the Rhine, a coalition of German states bound not by ancient oaths, but by French power. Too many German-speaking people. This was humiliation layered upon humiliation. French troops occupied cities. German princes pledged loyalty to a foreign emperor. The map of Central Europe was redrawn at will. Yet beneath the humiliation, something subtle began to stir. Intellectuals wrote of folk and shared culture. Students whispered about unity. The idea spread slowly, like embers beneath ash. If they shared a language and heritage, why were they not one nation? Across universities in Jena and Heidelberg, young men debated destiny. Philosophers like Fichte spoke of a spiritual Germany, deeper than any crown or border. And while princes remained divided, Catholic and Protestant, liberal and conservative, the people increasingly imagined themselves as part of a greater whole. It was not yet a revolution. It was a question forming in the dark. When Napoleon's empire finally collapsed in 1814 and 1815, Europe's monarchs rushed to restore order. They gathered at the Congress of Vienna, determined to prevent another upheaval. Among them stood the calculating Austrian diplomat Clemens von Metternich, a master of balance and suppression. His mission was clear: crush nationalism, restore monarchies, and preserve stability at any cost, even if it meant silencing the very forces now awakening across Germany. The settlement they crafted stitched Europe back together with remarkable care. France was contained, monarchies were restored. In Central Europe, a new German confederation emerged, 39 states bound in a loose alliance. Austria presided over it. Prussia accepted it. On paper, balance had returned. But this new structure was fragile. It offered cooperation without unity, defense without identity. Austria, vast and multinational, sought to maintain influence. Prussia, disciplined and ambitious, watched carefully from the north. Beneath the diplomatic smiles at Vienna lay a rivalry waiting for opportunity. The old empire was dead, the new Germany was undefined. And two powers were quietly positioning themselves to shape its future. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the forces that shaped modern Europe, make sure to subscribe and like the video. It helps more people discover these stories and ensures we can continue uncovering the turning points that changed the world. Because what began as Napoleon's triumph had ignited something far more dangerous than conquest. It had awakened a question that would not fade. And as Austria and Prussia eyed each other across the German Confederation, that question was about to become a struggle for dominance. In 1819, Prussia made a decision that seemed administrative, almost dull. There were no drums, no declarations of glory. Just tariffs removed, borders softened, trade liberated. The creation of the Zollverein, a customs union among German states, barely made headlines beyond merchant circles. But revolutions do not always begin with gunfire. Sometimes they begin with ledgers and rail schedules. The Zollverein gradually bound together most of the German states into a single economic network. Goods flowed freely across internal borders. Coal from the Ruhr-fueled factories in Saxony, iron-fed steelworks. Railways stitched cities together in lines of iron that ignored political fragmentation, and crucially Austria was excluded. This exclusion was no accident. Austria's economy was less industrialized, more agrarian, and burdened by its diverse empire stretching into Hungary and the Balkans. By leaving Vienna outside the customs union, Prussia quietly shifted the center of gravity northward. Economic power began translating into political influence. German states increasingly looked to Berlin, not Vienna, for prosperity. Factories rose beside smokestacks, urban populations swelled. A new middle class emerged, confident and educated. Nationalist ideas once whispered in university halls now traveled by newspaper and rail. The idea of unity was no longer romantic poetry. It was practical economics. Trade made fragmentation feel inefficient. And efficiency in the 19th century was power. Austria sensed the shift. The Habsburg monarchy, long dominant within the German Confederation, watched its authority erode without a single battlefield loss. Diplomats maneuvered, conferences were called. But Prussia's strength was becoming structural, rooted in industry and infrastructure. The rivalry that began in quiet resentment was evolving into open competition. Then, in 1862, a new figure entered the story, heavy-set, sharp-eyed, and utterly unsentimental. Otto von Bismarck became minister-president of Prussia. He did not speak of dreams or destiny, he spoke of realism. He famously declared that the great questions of the time would not be decided by speeches and majority votes, but by blood and iron, and Europe would soon learn what he meant. Bismarck understood something profound. Nationalism could be weaponized. He would not suppress it like Metternich had tried. He would harness it. His strategy required careful provocation and limited wars, short, decisive conflicts that would strengthen Prussia's position without triggering continental catastrophe. It was a dangerous calculation, and one misstep could ignite all of Europe. The first test came in 1864. Prussia and Austria jointly waged war against Denmark over the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein. The conflict was brief. Denmark was defeated. But the real tension lay in how the spoils would be managed. Bismarck ensured that the arrangement created friction between Prussia and Austria. The trap was being set. 2 years later, in 1866, that tension erupted. War between the two German giants began. It lasted just 7 weeks. Prussia's army, modernized, disciplined, and equipped with the revolutionary needle gun, moved with astonishing speed. Railways delivered troops efficiently. Strategy outpaced tradition. Austria's forces were overwhelmed at the Battle of Königgrätz. The old German Confederation dissolved in the aftermath. Austria was excluded entirely from German affairs. Centuries of Habsburg influence in Germany ended not with ceremony, but with a signature on a treaty. Prussia now stood unchallenged in the north. The balance crafted so carefully in 1815 at Vienna had been shattered. Yet Bismarck showed restraint. He did not humiliate Austria excessively. He knew today's enemy could be tomorrow's ally. Instead, he reorganized the northern states into the North German Confederation under Prussian leadership. It was unity, but only partial. One obstacle remained: France. And in Paris, Napoleon III was watching uneasily as Prussia's power expanded. Europe had shifted again. The rivalry between Austria and Prussia had reshaped Central Europe, but it had also unsettled the wider balance of power. And Bismarck, patient and calculating, was already preparing the next move. In the summer of 1870, Europe stood on edge. Prussia had defeated Austria. The northern German states were aligned under Berlin. But the southern states, Bavaria, Württemberg, Baden, remained outside full political unity. They were German in language and culture, yet hesitant to submit to Prussian dominance. One final crisis would decide everything, and it would begin not with an invasion, but with a telegram. The dispute seemed almost trivial at first: a vacant Spanish throne. a Hohenzollern prince considered as a candidate. France, led by Napoleon III, feared encirclement by Prussian influence. Diplomatic messages were exchanged. Tension simmered, then Otto von Bismarck intervened. He edited a message the now famous Ems dispatch so that it appeared France had been insulted and dismissed. The tone was sharpened, the language tightened. Published to the press, it ignited outrage in Paris, exactly as Bismarck intended. France declared war in July 1870, and in doing so, handed Prussia the moral high ground. Southern German states, fearful of French aggression, rallied behind Berlin. What decades of speeches had failed to accomplish, foreign threat achieved overnight. German unity was no longer theoretical, it was mobilized. The war unfolded with startling speed. Prussian-led forces, equipped with superior artillery and coordinated through rail networks, overwhelmed French armies. At Sedan in September 1870, Napoleon III himself was captured. The French emperor, once a symbol of imperial confidence, became a prisoner of war. Paris would soon endure siege and starvation. Across the German states, nationalist fervor surged. Newspapers celebrated victories, volunteers flooded recruitment offices. For the first time, Germans from north and south fought under a common banner. Yet beneath the triumph lay a deeper transformation. Unity was being forged not through democratic assembly, but through military conquest. The question lingered, what kind of nation was being born? By January 1871, the outcome was undeniable. French resistance was collapsing. And in a gesture heavy with symbolism, German princes gathered in the glittering Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles. On January 18th, beneath chandeliers that reflected centuries of French grandeur, they proclaimed a new empire. Wilhelm I was declared Kaiser of a united Germany. The choice of location was deliberate. Versailles was not merely a palace, it was a statement. France had once dictated Europe's balance of power from these halls. Now, a new empire was born at its heart. Applause echoed against mirrored walls, uniforms gleamed, banners shimmered. The German Empire Deutsches Reich had arrived, but unity came at a cost. France was forced to cede Alsace and parts of Lorraine. A heavy indemnity was imposed. The humiliation was profound. In Paris, bitterness hardened into resentment. The memory of 1871 would not fade easily. Germany, meanwhile, surged forward. Industrial output soared, railways multiplied. Universities advanced science and engineering. The empire's structure reflected Prussian dominance, authoritarian, disciplined, centralized. It was strong, efficient, ambitious. And if you're captivated by how calculated strategy reshaped Europe's destiny, take a moment to subscribe and like the video. It ensures more viewers discover these deep historical journeys and allows us to continue telling the stories behind the world's turning points. Because while Germany celebrated unity, Europe's balance had shifted once more. A powerful, industrialized nation now stood at the continent's center. France smoldered with resentment, Britain watched cautiously. Austria recalibrated its alliances. The triumph in Versailles felt glorious, inevitable, even, but humiliation has a long memory. And the new empire, forged in victory, would soon discover that strength can inspire fear, and fear can reshape the world. The German Empire entered the world with confidence bordering on destiny. In the decades after 1871, it transformed with astonishing speed. Steel production rivaled Britain's, chemical industries led the globe. Universities became centers of scientific breakthrough. Cities like Berlin and Hamburg expanded into symbols of industrial modernity. Germany was no longer a fragmented patchwork of states, it was a powerhouse at the heart of Europe. At the diplomatic helm stood Otto von Bismarck, now Imperial Chancellor. His strategy after unification was cautious. Germany, he believed, was a satiated power. It needed stability, not conquest. He crafted a web of alliances designed to isolate France and prevent a two-front war. Chief among them was the dual alliance with Austria-Hungary in 1879. Balance was maintained carefully, like a tightrope walker crossing a stormy sky. Yet beneath the surface, pressures mounted. Industrialization fueled not only prosperity, but competition. Germany sought colonies in Africa and the Pacific. At the Berlin Conference, European powers divided Africa with startling indifference to its people. Germany entered the imperial race late, but with ambition. The empire wanted its place in the sun. In 1890, everything shifted. A young emperor, Wilhelm II, forced Bismarck to resign. Impulsive and eager for prestige, Wilhelm rejected cautious diplomacy. He dreamed of global influence, of naval dominance, of recognition equal to Britain's vast empire. The delicate system Bismarck had built began to unravel, and few fully understood how dangerous that unraveling would become. Germany embarked on a naval expansion that alarmed London. Massive dreadnought battleships slid from shipyards into the North Sea. Britain, long secure in its maritime supremacy, responded with its own buildup. Suspicion hardened into rivalry. Meanwhile, alliances solidified into opposing blocs, the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente. Europe was dividing into armed camps. Then came 1914. In Sarajevo, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand triggered a crisis that spiraled beyond control. Alliances activated like clockwork. Mobilization plans designed for speed left little room for diplomacy. Germany declared war on Russia and France. It invaded Belgium, drawing Britain into the conflict. What leaders believed would be a short war became a grinding catastrophe. The First World War devoured millions. On the Western Front, trenches carved scars across landscapes from the North Sea to Switzerland. Machine guns and artillery turned fields into wastelands. Germany fought on multiple fronts, stretching resources thin. The British naval blockade strangled imports, causing shortages at home. Hunger spread, morale cracked. By 1918, exhaustion was everywhere. Soldiers mutinied, workers protested, revolution simmered in port cities. As defeat became unavoidable, Wilhelm II abdicated and fled to the Netherlands. In November 1918, the empire proclaimed in triumph at Versailles collapsed almost overnight. A republic was declared in Berlin. Germany signed the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. It accepted territorial losses, military restrictions, and heavy reparations. Many Germans perceived it as humiliation layered upon defeat. The sense of betrayal and injustice seeped into political life. Extremist voices found eager audiences. The empire born in glory had ended in collapse, and the consequences would echo through the 20th century. German unification had reshaped Europe's balance of power. It ended Austrian dominance in Germany. It created an industrial and militarized giant in Central Europe. It inspired pride, but also fear. When Europe descended into World War in 1914, it was not an accident of fate. It was the culmination of decades of rivalry, ambition, miscalculation, and pride. The world wars did not truly begin in Sarajevo. They began when an empire died in 1806. And another rose determined to define its place in the sun.